to see you.
Corruption, of course, costing the economy billions, threatening job creation. Why is this still happening so often? And it's something that we can't get a grip on.
So it's an interesting question. I think that one has to realize that people desensitize themselves very, very easily. And if we look at situations, go back historically to, there was a case called Equity Funding Corporation of America back in the 60s and 70s, which was one of the biggest fallouts ever, where you saw entire numbers of people, up to 100 people inside the organization, had become involved in a scheme of corruption. Then you saw Enron, and there was another massive situation with huge impact and fallout. Anderson Consulting fell on its sword on the back of that. And so it's very easy, you know, if you leave Heathrow Airport, assume you could have flown to Sydney in one flight. If you left the airport 1 degree off course, when you flew over the channel, you wouldn't really notice it. But when you get to where you think Sydney was going to be, that's where it's not. And it's very easy. It starts with little deviances. And as those deviances get demonstrated from the top down, those people who choose to fall in line do that. At the same time, you've got the disengagement and the disillusionment of people inside of the organization, and those who would want to see things done right, out of fear, don't blow the whistle, don't stand up and have it counted. And it just is a cascading thing which impacts on job creation, it impacts on people's well-being, it impacts on people's health, absenteeism increases, so productivity gets diminished. It's a vicious circle.
So I want to talk to you about why people don't speak up in a moment, but I also want to speak to you now about executives and whether they recognize the dire consequences of corruption, and you know, whether or not they might not recognize it or do recognize it, but greed really blinds them when it comes to it.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point, is that it becomes a self-seeking pursuit. You find that there are more and more narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths who are heading up organizations. We've seen that in the case of Lehman Brothers, for example. Richard Fuld was a very interesting character known as the gorilla because of his approach and attitude and disregard for input from anyone and everyone. So I think you've got those people who are busy trying to do the good thing, who got their heads down, and everybody's so busy and this world is changing so quickly and pressures are coming on us in all sorts of ways, disruption, innovation, ambiguity. We see complexity increasing. So people in the world of work are not aware of it until it becomes something that gets blown out, something that gets discovered. So quite often that corruption is not on the face of it. It's not overt, it's covert.
So let's talk about employees. I mean, we have some workers who might notice that corruption is happening.
Yes.
They're now being called disengaged workers. Why aren't they speaking up?
Gosh, I think that most people, and we find in the work that we do, even your really high-performing, high-achieving individuals, a very large percentage of them are motivated by fear. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of lack of success, and lack of relevance. People aren't appreciated in the workplace. And so it takes a lot of courage, and courage isn't something that comes to people easily. You've got to really believe and have a real sense of purpose and vision for what's right and correct to actually stand up and do that. And most people are just trying to get by and trying to keep their jobs. Fear of loss of jobs, what do I do? How am I going to protect my family? And the disengagement that we see in the workplace is not only stemming from the potential corruption or malfeasance that you see going on. There's a much broader base of reasons why people are disengaged. And the Gallup survey estimates that to the tune of about $7 trillion is lost as a result of employee disengagement. I mean, that is a scary thing.
No, it's terrible. I mean, we also hear about the president talk about corruption and fighting corruption in the public sector.
Yes.
What do we have in place in the private sector to actually make sure this doesn't happen?
I think an emerging group of people, particularly if you look at a lot of the millennials that are coming up, they have a very much more principled perspective. They want to add value. They want to make a difference to the world that they live in. They're better corporate and global citizens. And I think you're going to see a polarization starting to occur as we endeavor and start creating more and more self-aware leaders. So reflection, self-awareness, the non-command and control. Command and control is not a good thing for engagement. We're needing to find a new way of work and a new way of leadership. And it speaks to those things that don't necessarily come easy. Authenticity, talking about being resilient, talking about being agile. That requires people to be agile internally. It's not just an intellectual concept or a system that you can learn, the 7 steps of. There are 7 steps of many things, but applying them is a very different story. So it's people being able to take an internal journey of substance and being able to link that to higher purpose, levels of purpose and meaning in and through what they're doing. Leaders that are able to be visionary, leaders that are able to be compassionate, leaders that are able to be vulnerable and to set that example are the people who are going to make a new country, make a new economy, and they are happening right now. I'm very happy to say I'm seeing it emerging in businesses, and the transition is significant, and it isn't necessarily organic. It can be an accelerated, revolutionary type of change.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. Guy with the funkiest spectacles on the show today. Thanks.